Nigeria's return to democracy in 1999 was a significant event. It marked the end of 16 years of oppressive military rule marked by numerous human rights violations. In recent years, significant human rights issues in Nigeria have included arbitrary and unlawful killings, torture, unlawful arrests, problems with judicial independence, restrictions to free speech, gender-based violence, and child labor. Now, the activities of non-state actors such as Boko Haram and the Islamic State in West Africa have also added to the mounting concerns plaguing the country and its people as Nigeria seeks to consolidate on her democratic journey. Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Afam Osigwe, is with me in the studio. Thank you so much for joining us. And
thanks for having me.
Happy 25 years of unbroken democracy. Well, human rights and freedoms are at the core of democracy. Section 34 of the 1999 Constitution provides that every individual is entitled to respect for the dignity of his person. Let's take it from there. How have we fared, human rights-wise, in general, as a whole, before we come down to the details?
Well, your intro already said it all.
Right.
The activities of law enforcement agencies, non-state actors, terrorism, and also weak enforcement by requisite institutions in society has contributed to the worsening insecurity in our country and with the attendant violation of rights, and which oftentimes go unenforced and unprotected. So even though we've had the democratic rule for 25 years, the story cannot be said to be rosy for the enjoyment of fundamental rights by the citizenry, especially in areas ravaged by insecurity. So there have been forced evictions, people have been displaced from their homes and can no longer enjoy the welfare and security of their lives and property. Many state governments, in violation of known principles of law, embark on mass demolition of properties, depriving people of their home without due process of law. And then many people's rights are violated by law enforcement agencies. And oftentimes, when they go to court and get judgment, they cannot reap the fruits of the benefits of their judgment because we put in laws in place to also frustrate their ability to also recoup whatever damages have been awarded to them by the courts. And in some cases, inability to afford access to legal services or a weak judicial system in some places have made it difficult for people to fully enjoy their rights. So I would say it has been a mixed bag of enjoyment of democracy without the full enjoyment of the real dividends of democracy, as we say. So people's rights are violated, and in some cases people have lost confidence in the ability of the state or the community to protect them. So it is both by state and non-state actors that have operated either independently or in coordination to ensure that these rights are not fully enjoyed by individuals. And that is at the core of governance, because Section 14.2 makes it clear that the security and welfare of the people shall be the primary aim of government. So when things happen and the state is not able to ensure that these rights are protected, and when the judiciary render judgments, which the same judiciary failed to enforce by relying on Section 84, for example, of the Sheriffs and Civil Processes Act, to deprive people of whatever damages have been awarded by the court, have led to the perception that some of these laws are very good in writing, but in practical steps do not ensure that people enjoy their rights.
But what exactly is fundamentally wrong? Because some would say that the rule of law is usually the #1 casualty when it comes to whether it's a democratic setting or what have you in a society like ours. What do you think is fundamentally wrong?
Well, it's difficult to place because the story is not the same in all places. You mentioned Boko Haram in Borno State, and I mentioned banditry in states like Zamfara, Katsina, and Sokoto, and I mentioned kidnapping and insurgency in some other parts of the southeastern part of Nigeria, and farmer-herded clashes in parts of Taraba, Benue State, and some other parts of Nigeria. These are things to ensure that people are not enjoying their rights. Now, in some cases, there may be condonation or unwillingness to act by the state, by law enforcement agencies. There may be cases of law enforcement agents taking sides, but there will also be the failure of the state to actively, in some cases, work towards eradicating these things to ensure that people return to their homes, to ensure that these things are put to an end. And our inability to agree, for example, with respect to farmer-herder clashes on what is the best solution to it. Sometimes politicizing it and sometimes introducing ethno-religious sentiments into it, instead of agreeing that this is an existential problem which the state needs to tackle, which we need to find common sense solutions to, as there to worsen people's ability to enjoy the rights. And then for IDPs, people who have been displaced for many years, also some cases they're being prevented forcefully by the state from returning home because they feel that their places are unsafe for them to return, or for them to return sometimes without being protected. And then the individual has taken the laws into their hands because of weak governance, or a failure of governments, like in some parts of the Southeast where people have, in violation of the law, taken the laws into their hands, burned down police stations, and there's very little presence of quasi powers of the state or security to protect lives and property, and criminal elements have taken over in these areas, extorting money from people, kidnapping people, ransoming them, killing people, imposing their will on the people. So people living in such conditions and areas find it difficult to enjoy fundamental human rights. So it becomes a rat race just to survive. You're not talking about. Sometimes the courts have abdicated because they've run away. The judges cannot sit there because the security of the lives of the judges and the courtrooms, in some cases the courtrooms have been burned. And so it becomes an issue of state and non-state actors effectively working to deprive the people of the enjoyment of their fundamental rights.
Where do we start from to fix the issue of human rights? Is it judicial reforms? Many have said, look, we need to, address the judiciary, ensure an independent judiciary, not just in word, but in deed. Is that where we need to start from to begin to protect the human rights of every Nigerian?
Now, with the peculiar situation which I've alluded to earlier, which I have tried to explain, if you reform the judiciary and the courts cannot sit in these areas, or the people have been so intimidated that they can't even go to court, that those who go to court are killed, or those who go to court are seen to be collaborating with the enemy, as it were, then we see that we only are addressing one part of the problem. So we have to restore security of lives and property. We have to put the terrorism and insurgency and the banditry to an end. We have to have people have confidence in the ability of the state to protect lives and property and ensure that people enjoy the fundamental rights to the full. And if we keep blaming the state for it, and the people sometimes also work towards ensuring that these rights are violated, when the people, for example, decide oftentimes that where a crime is allegedly committed, they must take the laws into their hands by lynching an alleged thief, or burning down people's homes because of disagreements and all that. Reforming the judiciary may, to the extent that that the law enforcement agencies are able to investigate and apprehend criminals and bring them to court, then that's where the judiciary comes in. But if there's no proper institutions of state to protect people, to investigate crime, detect crime, prevent commission of crime, then no matter how well you do in the judiciary, you're wasting your time. So I mean, it has to be a whole basket of solutions. We have to bring all the problems into the basket,
in one basket,
and provide solutions to each and every one of them.
Help us provide some solutions.
I've talked about first of all restoring normalcy, ensuring that the organs of government are allowed to function, that people are allowed to enjoy their life to the full, people are able to return to their homes in places where they have been displaced, and that the state restores the institutions of state, like ensuring that the police stations that are burnt are rebuilt, establishing the authority of the state, not to allow banditry, terrorism, and all these things to take place, to the extent that that is possible. And I think there's been cheering news from the army that making progress in tackling this, but there are more things needs to be done. So if we put it on the doorstep of the state alone, where the people in some cases take the laws into their hands to ensure that whatever effort is made by the government does not work.
Speaking of the army,
it will be talking too much to expect that the government will solve the problems. Yes, please.
Speaking of the military, in the war against insurgency, a lot has been said about the abuse of human rights in fighting back terrorism and what have you, not just in the northeast but in different parts of the country. How do you even begin to address that particular issue? I need
to say that the military should be commended for the fight against terrorism, but a lot needs to be said about the attitude of the military in embarking on vengeance and vindication and using vengeance to address issues. Take, for example, some soldiers were mobbed at, I think that's Banex Plaza.
Yes.
And the military shut down the place, took the laws into their hands. And if in a society where might is right, is allowed to right, where the military does not feel bound to respect the rule of law, then we'll have a problem. So that may lead to extrajudicial killing of people, doing things that are not unlawful in fighting unlawfulness. And in some cases, it worsens the situation.
Yeah.
I recall that Boko Haram only got out of hand when Yusuf, the founder of Boko Haram, was killed in unlawful circumstances while in the custody of the police. And in some cases, using such lawlessness and unlawful means to fight a bad situation may only harden people and worsen them and make some of the host communities hostile to them. Because sometimes the people that really get killed are not the actors of this, but sometimes innocent civilians who had nothing to do with them, whose only crime is that they happen to live or be around areas where such crimes were perpetrated against law enforcement or uniformed agencies.
Unfortunately, we're not able to, look back and point out those sore moments in terms of human rights. NSAS sticks out like a sore thumb, definitely. There was NSAS, the issue of Okwama, of course, the Barnex situation that you talked about, and other similar situations. Shehu Sani at the Democracy dinner, yesterday, drew the attention of the president to a number of, NSAS protesters who are still in detention. Asking the president to please do something about
them to court or release them.
Yes.
I mean, our society cannot function in that manner where people are held for prolonged periods of time without having their day in court, some cases without there being a file existing against them. And so it enforces the theory that sometimes there are enforced disappearances in our nation. Right. And many people are held for long period with their rights being violated, sometimes even in violation of court orders, where court has ordered for their release, and those holding them refuse to, and because they don't feel bound to obey court order. The society will collapse if such a system were allowed to be prevalent all over the country.
I have to say thank you very much. Not to forget that over 80% of prison inmates in Nigeria are waiting trial. It also speaks to the issue. No country should have
such a record.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much. Afam Osigwe, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Thanks for joining us.